This is AM Agenda with Kieran Gilbert.
Hello and welcome to the program as we start the final parliamentary sitting fortnight of the year, and the issue to dominate will be the government's policy on school funding. Coming up to discuss that, I've got the Greens leader Christine Milne, also Labor's education spokesperson Kate Ellis. First though, this Monday morning, Josh Frydenberg, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, and the Shadow Assistant Treasurer Andrew Leigh. Gentlemen, it's good to see you both.
Good morning. Thanks, Kieran.
First of all, Andrew, I'll go to you on this. Tony Abbott yesterday said that he will honour the promise that that the coalition made before the election, not the promise that some people thought they made. Do you accept that there were caveats in the comments made by Mr Pyne and Mr Abbott before the election that do allow a going back to the drawing board, so to speak?
Kieran, not only do I not accept it, but Liberal premiers don't accept it, and Andrew Bolt doesn't accept it. Mr Abbott is in one of those situations where he's 6 feet down and digging as fast as he can, and despite the fact that there are plenty of instances out there in which he very clearly said that no school would be worse off under the coalition. He said there was a unity ticket, and he is clearly breaking that promise to the Australian people. It's a pretty fundamental promise. I mean, this is something that matters for the future of our kids, providing certainty of funding into the future. Mr Abbott and Mr Pyne are walking away from that in, I think, a pretty cowardly and craven way, simply in order that they can provide a big tax cut to big miners and big polluters.
Josh Frydenberg, are you worried that this is going to be a political rod for the coalition's back for the rest of this term, given you made trust such a big issue in the first or in the previous term of the Labor government?
Quite the contrary, Kieran. We've got a great story to tell on education. In fact, we're going to be putting $230 million more than Labor would ever put into schools by giving extra money to Queensland, to WA and to the Northern Territory. You see, Chris Bowen told the truth here. Chris Bowen said what Bill Shorten wouldn't, which was that Labor ripped $1.2 billion out of the school funding budget just before the election, and we have to live with that. Now, under Labor's model, 200 schools in New South Wales will be worse off, and we don't want to see schools worse off. So we're not only going to match what Labor promised in terms of education funding, but we're going to increase it with an extra $230 million.
But I just want to put to you the position of the New South Wales Premier and Adrian Piccoli, the New South Wales Education Minister, who have been just as strong as Andrew Leigh and his counterparts in criticising this decision. They want the deal honoured. This is the Liberal Premier of New South Wales and his minister.
Well, they're putting the case for New South Wales, but as Chris Pyne has repeatedly said, he's the Minister for Education for all of Australia, and he has to look at the entire impact on the various jurisdictions. And Labor bequeathed us a huge mess here, Kieran, a huge mess. Different indexation, different funding amounts, Queensland, Western Australia, Northern Territory, outside the deal. What a mess that Christopher Pyne has had.
So what do you put Andrew, I'll come back to you in a moment, Andrew, but I want to ask Josh Frydenberg about this statement from Tony Abbott yesterday, where he said, we'll honour the promises we made, not the promises some people thought we made or thought we should make.
Well, we're very clear.
What's at the heart of that confusion, do you think?
We are absolutely committing to meeting the funding that Labor promised at the last election to schools. That was the promise we made, and that's the promise we'll keep. But as I said,
You're not being tricky on it?
Absolutely not. We're going to better that promise. We're actually going to put an extra $230 million. See, the other thing that Andrew forgets, it's not just funding that makes a difference to education outcomes. In fact, funding for schools is up 44% over the last 10 years.
I don't want to get distracted. I want to talk to Andrew now about some of those points. On that issue of, I suppose, the overarching issue of what Josh Frydenberg's arguing about is the quantum of money, that they are willing to up that by more than $200 million. And the states that will benefit are WA, Northern Territory and Queensland. You'd agree that they will be getting more under the coalition than they would have under the previous Labor government.
Well, let's knock off this $1.2 billion, then we can get back to Mr Abbott's broken promise. The $1.2 billion comes from the fact that before the election, Labor repeatedly said to states, if you're willing to guarantee you won't take money out, then we'll put in $2 for every dollar you put in. Queensland, WA and the Northern Territory wouldn't sign up to that, so we kept the money in the budget, but right at the moment when we went into caretaker mode, when that was no longer possible for them to sign up, then the public servants putting out the pre-election fiscal outlook,
The public
took it out.
The public servants, Kieran.
That's the comparison.
Hysterical. So you're blaming the public servants now, Andrew.
Settle down, mate.
Yeah.
At the point at which the money couldn't be spent any longer, then it was taken out of the estimates. If Queensland WA&T had signed up at any point to a reasonable deal, we would have backed it. Mr Abbott very clearly said that no school would be worse off, and he has breached that promise to Australian families and to their kids. And Josh is now suggesting that money doesn't matter.
Well, I just say...
Christopher Pyne said, and this is a quote that has been read already this morning half a dozen times by Labor figures. Christopher Pyne said, "We have agreed to the government school funding model. Every school in Australia will receive dollar for dollar the same federal funding over the next 4 years, whether there is a Liberal or Labor government." That does not sound like that leaves much wiggle room.
Well, as I said,
the unity ticket.
Well, I just want to say firstly, Andrew Lee has just revealed something very significant here today.
Yes, the pre-election fiscal outlook is put out by public servants.
You've actually said that it was the public servants who ripped the 1.2 billion.
Who put out the pre-election fiscal outlook.
You're at odds.
That's the number you're
Andrew,
that's the
unfortunately, you're on the back foot now, mate, because you are at odds with Chris Bowen, who admitted that it was Labor who took the 1.2 billion. So actually, Labor is now trying to blame the public servants. You blame them for the pink bats, for the overpriced school halls, for the NBN. You were the government and you ripped 1.2 billion out. We're going to deliver a better outcome, Kieran, for schools, for teachers,
should the then Labor government have kept that 1.2 billion in the pre-election fiscal outlook in the last budget update before the election in order to prevent this opening for the coalition?
Kieran, we have to be clear. Labor didn't put out the pre-election fiscal outlook. That is put out by the public servants. I'm very sorry Josh isn't aware of that fact, but it's pretty important to understanding budgeting in Australia. That's where the $1.2 billion claim comes from, and it is false because the public servants simply reflected the fact that the window for Queensland, WA and NT to sign up had closed. So now, now the coalition are in the position of going back and saying, well, we're going to take all this money that we gave to other states that signed up, we're going to cut that down, and we're now going to spread it out further, meaning that kids are going to be worse off. It's a simple breach of promise.
We've got a little bit of Tony Abbott. He was on, as we mentioned a bit earlier, the Bolt report yesterday on the 10 Network. I want to play that for our viewers now.
We are going to keep our promise. We are going to keep the promise that we made, not the promise that some people thought that we made or the promise that some people might have liked us to make. We are going to keep the promise that we actually made.
Now, to move on a little, I want to ask you just about what's to blame here for this confusion that Tony Abbott alluded to yesterday on Channel 10. Is it the fact that the government, when in opposition, was not clear enough about what you were willing to agree to and not agree to?
I'll tell you who's to blame, Bill Shorten, because he has left such a mess for Christopher Pyne. I mean, this is not a national system that Labor has left. There's a whole little different changes in various different states, different indexation, different models. Queensland, WA...
you know why? That's because Queensland, WA and the Northern Territory...
But then it's no national system. Kieran, you see, that's the point here, right? Not only have you underfunded schools, but you haven't left a national model.
You said funding didn't matter a moment ago.
Well, no, funding does matter. But in addition, there are many other important things like teacher quality and principal autonomy.
Sure, which are all in the Gonski
and community engagement. But it's not the fault of the public servants, as Andrew Lee will have us believe.
No, but
it's actually the fault of the Labor Party.
The pre-election fiscal outlook, which Finance and Treasury...
But who left that system? You know, it was actually the Labor members, and Bill Shorten in particular, as the Education Minister, left that system to have $1.2 billion cut from it. So that's not the public servants' fault. So it's not a bad episode of Yes Minister here, Andrew.
You don't think the government's going to cop some political blowback here from? Well, I'm very confident
position. As people have a good look at this debate and see that we're adding $230 million in addition to meeting what Labor had promised, and we will deliver a better system for schools.
It would have been easier if you had those other jurisdictions stitched up before the election.
But terrible public policy, Kieran. I mean, these are jurisdictions who wouldn't guarantee not to take their money out as we put federal money in. You want to see more money go into schools and helping kids? Well, you've got to strike a deal with the state's pledge not to take out money. Otherwise, you don't achieve the result. If Josh thinks that's the kind of deal we should sign up to, then I've got a bridge you might like to buy.
We've got to take a quick break. We'll be right back on AM Agenda. Stay with us this morning with Josh Frydenberg and Andrew Lee in just a moment. This is AM Agenda. Thanks for your company with me this morning. The Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Josh Frydenberg, and the Shadow Assistant Treasurer, Andrew Lee. Josh, there's been a bit of criticism over Joe Hockey's decision to block ADM's bid for GrainCorp, including a rare statement from the US State Department to the Financial Review this morning. We're disappointed by the Government of Australia's decision to reject Archer Daniels Midland's proposed acquisition of GrainCorp, a State Department spokesperson was quoted as saying. That is rare indeed, isn't it, to see the diplomatic arm of the US government make a statement of that sort?
Look, that's not surprising, Kieran. It's a major US company and it has been blocked from acquiring an Australian company. Look, the FIRB is not a green light. It's a difficult process that companies go through to seek approval. But in fact, of the 131 foreign investment processes that have gone through under Joe Hockey's watch, he's approved 130 of them. So it's a pretty good record. This was a very complex case. It's a complex case because GrainCorp is responsible pretty much for a monopoly position, controlling about 85% of the bulk grain exports. And so it was never going to be easy to make a decision in this regard. And let me say, Kieran, that Labor doesn't have clean hands when it comes to foreign investment. And we remember back in 2011 when Labor blocked the Singapore Stock Exchange trying to take over the ASX. And, Joe Hockey had to take into account many different interests here and make a decision based on ultimately what is in the national interest. And, I think he has taken the right decision and will be supported for that.
The Liberal Party member for Hume, Andrew Lee, Angus Taylor, writes about the importance of establishing deep and sustainable trust-based relationships with clear rules of engagement and remedies for legitimate grievances. His argument is that the ADM did not win the trust of the farmers. Wouldn't that be crucial to having a viable takeover?
Well, Kieran, there's a number of firsts in this decision. One is that the Treasurer has very clearly said that he thinks that politics is the mainstay of making this decision. Secondly, it's the first time we've seen a US acquisition knocked over. And thirdly, it's the first time we've seen the Treasurer reveal the secret deliberations of the Foreign Investment Review Board. I think it flies entirely in the face of Mr Abbott's rhetoric about Australia being open for business. Sure, Mr Hockey has waved
if you look at this, and 131
uncontroversial
bids put since the government won. Joe Hockey's approved 130.
When I worked as a lawyer in Minter Ellison, sometimes you'd be thinking about doing an acquisition and you'd put it up to FIRB and so you had it as part of the contract. The vast bulk of the Foreign Investment Review Board applications are uncontroversial. The test is what you do on the controversial ones. Joe Hockey has clearly shown he wants to put the Nationals' political interest before the national interest.
One senior national figure who welcomed this warmly this decision is the Agriculture Minister Barnaby Joyce. He was on the Viewpoint program last night with Chris Kenny.
Well, coming up, congratulating the fact that we have kept this in Australian hands. The Australian national interest has been protected. It's quite obvious that if you had 90% of receivable sites owned by a company that didn't actually require to make its money from Australia, only 4% of ADM's income would have come from GrainCorp, that we put our grain growers in an invidious position where they would have been exploited and received less money.
And we've got some breaking news that's just been handed to me that the GrainCorp CEO, Alison Watkins, is going to resign from her position as Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of GrainCorp just days after Treasurer Hockey blocked that takeover bid. Any immediate reaction to that, Andrew?
Well, I think it reflects again the deep reverberations of this going through the community. You've seen criticisms from former Treasurer Peter Costello, some scathing words from Peter Reith. You've seen the business Council of Australia deeply disappointed, feisty editorials in the Financial Review. This is really a protectionist signal coming early from a government, and perhaps not surprisingly, given that the Prime Minister sees B.A. Santa Maria as being such an important icon, that now on an important Foreign Investment Review Board decision, you've got the 12 national MPs and senators wagging the coalition dog.
Let's go to Josh, because your reaction to that news that the GrainCorp CEO is stepping down, but also I want to get your thoughts specifically on the comments made by Peter Reith and Peter Costello, both, or one stronger than the other, but clearly both concerned about the decision, or at least the basis of it.
Well, as for Alison Watkins, she's very well respected, and I wish her well in the new opportunity in the corporate sector that she is going to pursue, and congratulate her on the work that she has done with GrainCorp.
And what about the critiques of Peter Reith and Peter Costello?
Well, both are very distinguished former parliamentarians and good friends of mine, and they're fully entitled to their view, but the government has made a decision, and it's made a decision based on the national interest, and it's not an easy one. Just like the Labor Party rejected the Singapore Stock Exchange attempt to buy the Australian Stock Exchange back in 2011. The point that Andrew forgets to mention is that FIRB was actually divided on this issue. They couldn't come up with a unanimous decision. And what was different about this case was that GrainCorp is in a monopoly position, controlling 85% of bulk grain exports, and it was very difficult, and therefore Joe Hockey had to take into account a number of factors and has made a decision based on the national. Let's
turn to foreign policy now, and the Australian's front page. New leaks set to test Abbott in Asia, is Greg Sheridan's story this morning, suggesting that, and I suppose this is what many people had anticipated, Josh Frydenberg, that there will be more leaks to come over coming months relating to China, espionage across Southeast Asia and even in the Pacific, and controversially as well, surveillance of Australian citizens, that some of that detail looks like it might be disclosed as well as part of these leaks.
Well, let's be under no illusions. These Snowden revelations are extremely damaging to the United States and to its allies, including Australia. And it's been reported that only 1% of the information that Snowden has passed on is actually out there in the public realm right now. So it's only a matter of time before more information is out there. These are allegations, so we would never comment on the specifics of any intelligence matters. But, I think Tony Abbott has handled these issues to date very well. And
he seemed to disagree with you, though. I saw you last week say that you believe that those publications shouldn't have broadcast or reported those particular stories. Tony Abbott yesterday said that it was a story. He understood why they were covered.
What Tony Abbott actually said was that the ABC, as the national broadcaster, shouldn't have just been a mouthpiece for The Guardian, because it was The Guardian that was breaking these stories. And my point was, I didn't see the public interest in the publication of these stories, but also the ABC has a specific role in charge of the Asia Network, or the Australia Network, and, as a broadcaster into the region, these allegations to be out there are damaging to Australia, and for the ABC to be broadcasting, I thought, it's only legitimate that genuine questions are asked.
Andrew Lee, you could comment on that if you like, but also in terms of this new report today by Greg Sheridan, that we can expect more to come, and not just in relating to Indonesia, but China, Malaysia, Papua New Guinea, East Timor, and even surveillance of Australian citizens. Does this undermine the whole intelligence framework?
Well, certainly I'd share Josh's view that it's important for parliamentarians not to comment on national security. But I think in broader terms, we are seeing entering some dangerous times in foreign policy. Labor really wants this government to succeed in the foreign affairs stage. But now with the ADM decision being criticised by the United States, with some of our diplomacy being criticised by China, with some of the blowback in the Malaysia relationship, relationship and the deep rifts with Indonesia, you're seeing some significant problems emerging in foreign policy for the coalition.
And more leaks would just exacerbate that, would they not?
I think they would, and I don't think it particularly helps to have members of the government attacking the media. I think parliamentarians do best when they take responsibility for their own mistakes. I'm somebody who lived in Indonesia for 3 years, in Malaysia for a year. I've got a personal investment in improving the relationship with these countries, but it is really vital that the government stops the blame game and starts taking responsibility for rebuilding the relationships
Josh,
which are so fragmented.
Finally to you.
Unfortunately, Andrew can't help himself but make partisan points when, you know, we should be coming together. These are allegations that date back to 2009 when Labor was in power. And what is more, you've had Bill Shorten out there saying we should be doing an Obama to Angela Merkel. Then you had him withdraw from that position. Then you had Tanya Plibersek, the opposition spokesperson on foreign affairs, trying to conflate the intelligence issue with the border protection issue. You know, you've got so many different positions on this issue. You're trying to walk both sides of the street, and at the end of the day, that does not help Australia strengthen the relationship with Indonesia. So if you are serious about it, you would get on behind us.
Andrew, we've only got 10 seconds left, but any final thought?
We're behind you, Josh, if you want to stop the boat buyback policy, which we know to be unpopular with Indonesia, if you want to stop the turn-back policy, which you know is unpopular with Indonesia, and if you want to make decisions in the national interest on foreign investment, which again would improve the relationship with the US.
Josh Frydenberg, Andrew Lee, thank you, gents. Have a good day.
Thanks,
a quick break, and we'll be right back with Kate Ellis and also Christine Milne in the next half hour.